Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Ex Libris from Renegade Games. Ex Libris is a 1 to 5 player game which players are going to be building out their library, trying to maintain order amongst chaos, and trying to figure out how to score as many points as possible in this game. Now I will say, I said 1 to 5 players, that's specifically with the expansion, the expanded archives, and I will be reviewing both of these together. You see, Ex Libris was a game that came out, I think 2017 I want to say, and since then Renegade Games has brought it back in a revised edition while adding a new expansion that's going to have some elements. They mixed a few things up, brought it back. I believe the base game is a little cheaper, but then once you add the expansion it'll be a little bit more, but it'll contain a little bit more, including that 1 to 5 player stuff. Let's go ahead and get into it. The general idea, though, is this is a game which you're going to be gathering cards. You're going to start the game with cards. You're going to be taking those cards and trying to slot a library out of them. Over here, you're going to be trying to put together those cards by maintaining alphabetical order across your library. So, for example, here we have D's, but we also have D's over here, but this is 1 out of 7, that's 7 out of 7. And if I slot this card next to those cards, it means I can no longer place another D card in between there, and so those other D cards, those other 5 D cards that I'm missing in this giant stack of cards you'll never see the whole thing of, well, those are all going to be gone. So you're trying to plan out around how many cards there are, around trying to preserve alphabetical order while maintaining 3 rows. You're going to have 3 rows of shelves. So at most you can go ahead and have, let's say we put down an O over here, we put down a T over here, that's going to be our 3-row bookshelf over here. You cannot go further than 3 rows, but you can go as wide as you want where you try to build out cards in this game. Now game end is going to be triggered depending on, and we're not going to get heavily into some of these details here, but game end is triggered depending on how many cards you have in your library, and that is dependent on both the expansions you're playing with as well as the player count. So for example, if you're playing with both expansions at a 2-player game, I think it's 18 cards, at a 3-player game, 16 cards. I may be getting some of the numbers wrong, but I'm going by what I recall playing with. But past that, you're going to be trying to build out a certain number of cards in your library, and then trying to balance your score across a variety of things over here. So you have a bunch of scoring criteria that you're trying to balance as you build out your 18 card or more library, because game end is triggered by 18 cards, but you can keep going ahead and slotting those cards in. To that end, what are you scoring for? How are you scoring? Well, you're going to be scoring for alphabetical order, which is the first thing, which is any card that does not fit into alphabetical order will be flipped down. Then you have shelf stability. That's the idea that you don't want a library that's simply floating out of the cards. Well, this over here is a legally built library. This will score you no points for shelf stability since you have no proper bottom row. Put that card down over here, and suddenly you have a 2x2. That's going to be your largest rectangle. That's going to be a 4-point shelf stability score for your largest rectangle that is supported from the floor up. Then you have prominent works. Prominent works is going to give you points for whoever has the most of a certain type of text. If you see these cards over here, you can see each card has various books on those cards. You can read the actual books, because you should, honestly. We have tax codex, we have tax evasion, we have teeny weeny genies, and we have tentacle creeps from the deeps. They went to great lengths to actually give you a whole lot of books you can read through whenever you're browsing through, waiting for someone to take their turn. There's a lot of fun little books to go through over here. But past that, all the relevant information you need is really up here. This is card T, it's 3 out of 10, and it has those 4 books, which means it's going to score 1 for reference text, which is helpful for this card over here. So you're trying to go for prominent works, scoring as many prominent works as possible, and scoring 15, 9, or 4 points, depending on how you did. Then you're going to score for your banned books, you're going to score 1 negative point per banned book. So spells and potions, for example, do we have any large? This card over here will be worth -2 points because it has 2 spells and potions books, and those are just banned works. In a 5-player game, you won't have banned works because you use that card, the 6 card types, and we're going to go ahead and go to the category. Let's go to library focus first. Library focus is going to be 2 points for every book that's within your focus. So for example, my focus is corrupted codices. So every book I have that fits that type will be worth an extra 2 points, and so you're going to be giving every player a random card, which means in a 4-player game or less, you're going to give every player one of the 6 types. You're going to put the other 2 types up here, and in a 5-player game, you're going to give one of 6 types to everybody, but you're still going to have prominent works, but you will not have banned books. And then lastly, you have categorical variety. That's going to be 3 points for every single book that fits your lowest scoring criteria outside of banned books. So you're going to look at whichever books you have the fewest of and get 3 points for each of those. Again, not counting banned books, you could have 0 of those and you're totally fine. That's the things you're trying to do as you play. How do you actually play? Well, it's a worker placement game, or a gnome placement game, as you place your various gnomes around the board, trying to go to various locations in the game. The game's going to have locations that stay in play every round, and new locations that come into play every round, plus, of course, your home board. And ultimately, before we get into what these various things do, the core things that's going to be happening here is these locations are going to give you various ways to gather new books and or shelve new books. You're going to be gathering books into your hand, and then slotting those books down into your bookshelf in order to have them actually go towards those 18 cards and score points for you by the end of the game. To that end, the most basic location you can go to is your home board. On your home board, you can use a gnome to draw a card. So for example, I go ahead and take a card. Look at that. I got this one, which is perfectly going to fit into my library somewhere. Past that, we can go ahead and place another one to shelve a card. So we can go ahead and start off our library. Let's go ahead and take that D, putting it down over here. That's going to be very helpful. Top shelf of our library. We're going to start building it out and then work our way outside of that. And so placing a card down to your library or drawing a card, that's things you can do on your home board. But then past that, you're going to have locations that start in play. That's going to be the Divinest Hut, the Artifactorium, and the Job Fair. These two are expansion tiles. The expansion adds a 5th player expansion, but it also adds these 2 new locations that are going to give you ways to get various artifacts that can go into your library. So for example, we can win this card over here and slot it over there, giving us some room and flexibility as we build out our library in different ways, and more importantly, giving us an ability. In this case, you're going to score 2 victory points for every face-down card adjacent to this artifact. That's going to allow you to break a lot of the alphabetical order rules while still getting rewarded for it, but possibly with fewer points. So you're going to have artifacts that are going to come into play every turn with the Artifactorium. You're going to have various meeples you can go ahead and place with the Job Fair. These are going to give you workers that you can proxy in. You can go to these locations, you can trade in your own worker, losing that worker, but instead getting the worker that's at this location. Now I have a gelatinous cube that I can go ahead and place down in various locations as I play through the game. And those workers come with abilities on them, which are written on the back of the card, and you can go through them, generally giving you various perks for being somewhere first or knocking someone out, or a whole bunch of different abilities. There's like 18 or something like that. There's a lot of these cards. I'm not going to go through what the abilities do, but all the various workers are going to give you new ways to benefit from the worker placement game as you play through them. And then past that, every single round, you're going to be placing locations out equal to the number of players. So over here, for example, we're going to go ahead and grab, let's say we're playing a 2-player game right now. We're going to go ahead and place out 2 new locations. And then at the end of the round, the lowest number of locations is going to stay in play, being added to the permanent locations, while the other one's going to go away. And the round after that, you're going to draw 2 more locations, meaning every round you're going to have more and more locations in play. And every round, the lowest number is going to stay in play, being added to the permanent locations that stay in play every single round. Now, I'm not going to go through what a bunch of these do, but I'll go through, let's say, one of here, just to keep a simple one. The Wishing Well allows you to place a gnome, discard X book cards, then draw X plus 1 book cards. So you can discard 5 books and draw up 6 books, and you may shelve one of the book cards when drawn. Many of the locations are going to have things like that, various ways to gather new books, and then to shelve some of the books that you're gathering right away, some or all of those books right away. There's going to be 2 location types, though. There's going to be instantaneous locations that give you the reward as soon as you go there, possibly limited by player count. The second location requires a 4-player count. There's also going to be various auction locations. When you go to one of these locations, this is only results at the end of the round. I can go over here, but then if another player outbids me, and there's more players than there are benefits to gain, then you'll have players discarding cards. You have to discard cards from your hand to pay for them, but you can get various rewards by going to this location. So if you want those artifacts, which can be very helpful, giving you endgame scoring or ongoing abilities, you may find yourself fighting with other players to get your hands on them. Similarly with the various assistants. Everyone does want that gelatinous cube, after all. You're going to rinse and repeat this process until eventually you have a player, and again, depending on player count, whether you have 18, 16, 14, whatever number of cards you have in your library, at which point game end is going to be triggered, and you'll score based on the variety of criteria up here, which is a good time to go ahead and dive into the review part of this, starting off with ease of play. Ease of play is easy with a caveat. The core game is a very simple worker placement game. You have your workers, there's a few small questions about setup, there's a standard mode, there's a beginner mode, few small things, but past that, it's a worker placement game with a few rules about how to slot your library. Overall, very easy. The expansion comes in and adds not much, a 5th player expansion, which will affect some things. So for example, this banned books card over here is going to be different if you're playing a 5-player game. You're going to have cataclysm variety. You're going to have to be flipping those over depending on the player count. But then past that, the main complexity comes from the fact that you're dealing with 2 different modules, and the way you mix things in will affect a bunch of things. The player count, the various locations. There are some locations that are only added to the game depending on those modules. Adjusting for, the number of books you have in your library. There's just a bunch of, I always find integrating things together when you have a rule set, but then a variable rule set, I always find that's a lot more work to go through, and it's not always immediately clear how some of the things implement or integrate together. So I'd say that I would recommend getting a first game in with the base game as is before diving straight into the expansion. I don't think the expansion is that complicated. It's more just trying to process one rule set and then adding another rule set on top of it from 2 full rule books to cover things. That will be the only complicated part. As far as where don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like. Which is, to begin with, the biggest thing I enjoy in this game is the organizing of your library. Building out a library, trying to plan around the various things you're going to need, and trying to plan around, well, you know what? You can only place a card orthogonally adjacent. Let's move this out of the way. You can only place a card orthogonally adjacent, which is easy at first, but ultimately, this first D goes down, okay? You know, placing this D down here is not such a huge sacrifice, so we'll ignore those 5 cards. There's things you can do with those 5 cards anyway. You can use them to pay other costs, or you can just deny other players. But then where do I put this H? Do I want the H down over here or over here? Am I going to loop around trying to circle? Because you're going from top to bottom, left to right, and so you're trying to plan around how far down. What about this T? Can I go ahead and place this T down over here, or is that a little too ambitious? Am I planning this out correctly? What about the various artifacts? There's going to be artifacts that you place onto your shelf that are going to reward you for adjacent things. Are you planning around that correctly? Are you placing this, maybe you place it on the left over here, because maybe it gives you a lot more flexibility about the next cards you place. And so there's a lot of things to consider as you ultimately build out your bookshelf, but the main charm of this game is that organizing of your books. It's that point collection system, that point variety system, and there's a lot of point things to consider. There's going to be the shelf stability, the prominent works, the banned books, the category variety, the library focus, any artifacts you have in play. You'll have artifacts to say, hey, I want, you know, a point for every potions and spells book around me, and I have to factor that in. And so everything in the game is giving you various things to consider as far as how you optimize your score, and so that core scoring optimization is the main thing that is appealing to me. Secondly, is the whimsical titles. You have a large amount of cards in this game, and every single one of those is has a ton of books on them, a ton of books to go through. There's, I don't know, like 700 books or something like that in this game, each one with their own unique title and a fun flavor to go through. Waiting on other people's turns is not a chore. Genuinely, you'll be like, oh, playing and winning the blame game. Does that sound like a good book? Playing and winning the blame game. We have I, Rowboat. Not I, Robot, I, Rowboat. We have Iron Maiden Maintenance, Invisible Beasts, and How to See Them. Fantastic beasts, and either way, lots of fun things going on over here. And the addition of the artifacts and the custom characters in the expansion are just solid additions to the game in the sense that artifacts to me, I think I appreciate a lot more than the custom characters. We'll get more into that in the things I don't like. But the artifacts give you extra things to consider, extra ways to score points, extra ongoing abilities. I think they're a great addition, and the custom characters are a lot of fun, giving you a lot of fun little whimsical creatures. They do have a downside, which we'll get to shortly, but a lot of fun little things to add to your game in different ways. You could go ahead, you could play without this expansion, you could play in a different way, which you give everyone a single custom character in addition to the 2 basic gnomes as their own characters, and remove that entirely, which could be a good way to play, and we'll talk more about why that is shortly. But the expansion just has more stuff that are just fun extra things to consider or balance or to go for as you go through the game. And then lastly, there's a variety of locations. There's a variety of locations giving you a constantly different gameplay as far as the ways to gather books, the different locations to send your people to in order to gather, shelve, trade, all these various ways to get your hands on books, to trade in books, to put things into your bookshelf, to try to optimize and go towards your end game score. As far as things I don't like, the biggest thing, and it is a big deal, is there's just way too much text going on in this game for the game weight, and the game weight is not that hard. It's like there's enough things to consider, there's enough things to process, but every single turn you're adding 2 text-based locations to the game, and that means every single round you're like, okay, great, now I have to read the tax collector and the book collector. Oh, by the way, we also have to go ahead and read these artifacts that we added to play, as well as to read what Gelatinous Cube does, because these are all things that are relevant. Every round you're putting down new cards, and so you have to look at the new cards that are in play. Every round you're putting down new locations, you're putting down new artifacts, you're putting down new workers that you can go ahead and process and gather, and that just means there's so much text being added every single round in a way that is a big negative for me. A big negative, because for me this is a game that by the time I'm halfway through playing the game, I stop paying attention to all the things that are in the game because I just don't care anymore. The game weight is not so high that I'm that obsessed with trying to eke out every single point, and I just don't want to read the 3 new locations and the 2 new characters. And so I find when I play this game, the artifacts, I find the text is short enough and they're important enough, I do read them, but I'd say that the various new characters, past the first round or 2, I usually stop paying attention to them when they come out. And then for the new locations, once we have a board full of locations, I kind of just don't care anymore. Sure, there's new things I can look at, there's new rules I can understand, but I find the game weight does not line up with the amount of text the game wants you to read every single turn. And it's not just a me problem, it's me and the people I'm playing with. I find we kind of tune out or tap out to a certain extent out of just how much the game wants us to be aware of in this game. And that has a negative in the sense of 2 things. First of all, it's just text heavy, but then secondly, the worker placement is just not a tight game. This game starts off being arguably maybe a bit tight on the worker placement, but very quickly shifts to just, hey, there's plenty of spots, go where you want, do what you want. Oh, you went to that spot? I don't care. There's 7,000 other spots I can go to. It's not going to be a problem. And so the game has too much stuff being added every single turn, which also has that aspect of just reducing it to a non-tight enough worker placement game with too much stuff that I just don't care to process all the information at my disposal every single round of the game. As far as what I can see others not liking, there's definitely luck of the draw in the game. There's definitely times where you go ahead and gather cards that will be helpful for you or cards that get in your way. It doesn't really bother me in this. I find there's so much mitigation and so many cards to draw from that ultimately you're going to find a way to make things work, but it could also be a factor in the game. As far as final thoughts on Ex Libris, I enjoyed the original game when I played it a long time ago, but I enjoyed it with the caveat that the complaint I had about Ex Libris when I first played the original, maybe 2017, 2018, I don't know how far back, but I played the original game, and I enjoyed it, but I also felt it was a bit too loose. And when I heard Renegade Games was, redoing it and reapproaching it, putting together a revised edition, I didn't know what to expect, but I was hoping that some elements of the game would be tightened up, and I can't say they have for me. To me, Ex Libris at its core, is a game that I do enjoy. I enjoy the process of building up my library. I want this game to be tighter because I like that. I love the whimsical text. I love the idea of trying to slot cards, of trying to figure out the best way. The artifacts, I think, are easily the best addition to the game that really adds more stuff to be added to your shelf that aren't just books, that adds a good degree of variety to the game. And the assistants I like, but again, you could go ahead and just use a random assistant at the beginning of the game so you all know your assistant and you don't bid on them. And my issue there is having another location. Again, it reduces the tightness of the worker placement, and it also means there's more text being added every single game. So I kind of prefer the various assistants to just be cycled in as your own custom assistant each game. But ultimately, at its core, the game gives me too much stuff to do, too much stuff to look at, and not tight enough worker placement. And so for me, Ex Libris is a game that I find myself wanting to like almost more than I actually do. I like parts of it, and other parts just get in their own way for me. For me, this is a 3 out of 5. It is a good game that I was so excited to hear this one was coming back because I was hoping they'd be tightening things up, and they have made improvements, but that core location system just still feels too loose and too text heavy for a game that I otherwise very much want to enjoy. So 3 out of 5, a good game. I still enjoy myself, but not one I feel the need to come back to at all, unfortunately. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for another magical library-themed game, Athenium the Magic Library is going to be another game that I find is a little less fun in some areas, but a lot more tighter in other areas, and a library-themed game that I'd probably recommend over this one. And if you're looking for a game of collecting various things to display in different ways, I think Museum Picture is going to be a much tighter, much more interesting game. Not as much library theme, so much as just focusing on gathering and displaying, but a lot of trading things in, a lot of processing, a lot of determining values in a whole different system that I think is very rewarding. That's Museum Picture. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.